We are live on LinkedIn. Hi, this is Mary MacCarthy here with the third episode of the Data Tea on Thursdays with Mary. Super excited this time, for the first time ever, having two guests, Dave Fowler and Matt David. Hi, guys. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Hello. Nice to be here.
Thanks so much for being here. So when I was coming up with the idea for this show, you guys were some of the first people I wanted to get on because you are published authors, and who publishes books anymore? It's like a rare breed. But I actually got a copy of the book. I don't know how much we can see it on the screen with the blur. Technology has blurred out the title. There we go. The Informed Company: How to Build Modern Agile Data Stacks that Drive Winning Insights. So you guys published this recently with Wiley. Congratulations. That's huge. We'll get into why you published it and, of course, what it's about. That's what we're going to focus on today. But first of all, I want you both to introduce yourselves. Tell me, where you came from and how you got into data. Let's start with you, Dave.
My name is Dave, and I was the founder of a company called Chartio, and did that for 11 years. And we've now sold Chartio to Atlassian, and now I work at Atlassian, and we just launched recently at our big conference a week ago. We launched Atlassian Analytics, which is basically relaunched and rebranded Chartio. And the mission of Chartio was to join teams on data, so to make it so everybody in the company, not just data analysts and data engineers, are working on data. One of the analogies we'd use is what Figma did to design, we want to do to data, and bring that really to everybody and make that easier for everyone to use. And so really excited to be part of Atlassian now and bring that forward. And what got me passionate about data is my own need. I was doing a startup years ago and spent 30% of my time trying to figure out in the data what was going on. And I was frustrated with how long and how that took and how hard it was. I was going through Y Combinator. All the other people in my batch were doing the same thing, and also spent 30% of their time trying to make dashboards that really sucked. And then I was living with two guys on the Facebook data team that were spending 100% of their time for Facebook building these dashboards. And I was like, everybody I know is spending 30 to 100% of their time solving the same problem. And I built first a little tool called SQL charts, and just type SQL and got charts. And then it expanded more in my passion toward, SQL is a big barrier for a lot of people. Like we should make it so everyone can use it. And we've over the years developed what's called Visual SQL. So I just have a lot of passion for data. I think it's one of the biggest, newest things as humans that we have to increase our human intelligence and capabilities. And so I'm just, very driven and passionate in the space.
I love that. So from Chartio to Atlassian, we can get more into that later, and a perspective that's driven kind of hand in hand by an appreciation for data, which at the heart is information, but also by wanting to solve business problems and being aware of that. And that's a thread that kind of goes throughout the book. Matt, your story has a little bit of crossover. Tell us why you got started on this exciting journey.
Yeah, so I started in the education world, working at Udacity, helping build data courses there. I kind of fell in love with data while working on those courses and seeing how dramatically it changed people's careers, adding a few skills, SQL, a BI tool. It's probably the easiest way to get into the tech world, honestly, is by going in the data route. And while working there, we were teaching tools that were kind of the most popular, like Tableau, but internally to Udacity, we were using Chartio, which I thought was a much better fit for kind of the modern data stack where you're constantly adding new sources, data is always changing, and Chartio just allowed you to quickly visualize the data and figure things out on your own, which I thought was very, very powerful. So Dave ended up recruiting me over to Chartio, worked there for a couple of years. That's where we wrote the book. Also joined with the Atlassian acquisition. And then recently I took a new role over at Datafold, which I think is helping to extend this story about how the modern data stack's evolving. So tools like Hightouch are now leveraging the warehouse. There's a lot more data science and machine learning attached to the warehouse. And so because the leverage of the warehouse is so much higher, the quality of the data needs to be that much higher. you don't want to send emails to the wrong people. You don't want to power algorithms with bad data. So Datafold kind of helps you deal with data quality in the pull request before anything gets merged, kind of gives you that visibility through your lineage all the way to your BI reports. So you know, hey, is this change going to blow up the CEO's dashboard? You know that before you do it. So.
Absolutely. So a journey from Udacity, Chartio, Atlassian, now Datafold. And I'd forgotten that you came from Udacity, and that explains in part, not to give you full credit for the good writing in this book. I'm sure Dave had something to do with that too, but people who come from kind of that teaching perspective tend to be good writers, especially with a book like this. And that's one of the great things I appreciated about the book was that, like a lot of data people, I buy a lot of, online courses. We all have those kind of like half-finished courses because we dive in to learn a new skill. And I actually pick up quite a lot of books too, but most of them you dip in and out of and get like the chapter you need. And this, I read cover to cover. So it's a good book. Before we dive into the book itself, when any of us content creators nowadays think about putting our content out there, I want to ask you, your thought process. I was literally in a meeting this week where the discussion around content was, do we do a tweet or a Twitter thread or a blog? Because that's kind of both the attention span and the expectation out there. So most of these discussions are very far from a book. At what point did the two of you put your heads together and say there's room on the market for a book about the modern data stack?
Well, this kind of started in why I recruited Matt originally. So as part of our mission, to really join people on data and join teams on data, we handled at Charter, we handled the viz layer. And we put so much time and energy into the viz layer, making that really intuitive. And then we would go meet with customers, and things were really slow and things were really messy. And there was kind of like nothing we could do at the layers below that if the data was just a pile of crap, and so that was kind of my frustration, helping people get to this point. I was like, we had user tested and proven that people could really use our product. 8 out of 10 people just hand them Chartio, could make really complex querying charts, but if their data was junk, it didn't work, and so actually when I first met Matt, it was because I knew that this problem was happening at Udacity. Their data was like messy. And I was looking for people and NPS scores, and I saw Matt had given a really low NPS score to Chartio, and then
what's that score? I don't know that score.
NPS, the Net Promoter Score.
Okay.
He ranked it really low, and then I was like, and he's on the data team. He was doing data stuff there, and I like reached out and was like, "Who's this guy? I'm going to talk to him about it." And and then we really just started chatting a lot about the vision and mission. I had just bought to kind of solve this, we bought dataschool.com, and with putting content on there, educational stuff. And so all the learnings from working with thousands of customers of like who's doing it well, what is good practice, what's best practice. And I would also go ask people, where did you learn data? Where did you learn those fundamentals? And they were, people's answer was always like Kimball Toolbook. And that was like the main book. Most people were really self-taught. There wasn't a lot of education on the fundamentals of data. And the Kimball Toolbook is a 20-year-old book, and data's changed a lot since then. And so
you say,
and I found most of those things, for a while, it was like, well, do half the things in Kimball Toolbook, do some of the things, do half the things. And eventually it was like the Kimball Toolbook became kind of obsolete. It was kind of like, don't do any of those things anymore, or don't do most of them. But it's still like the most referenced text-based book out there. So we also saw that online, there's a lot of tweets, there's a lot of articles on kind of the meta info around data, and there's just wasn't enough on the fundamentals, like what should you actually just go to, and like to keep it simple. And so we got really excited, and we wrote a lot of that content on dataschool.com. And then we also saw that frankly, people were still like using the Kimball Toolbook because it was the last big book on data and data modeling and data architecture out there. And so we're like, well, let's make a paper version. And even though that's maybe a little bit old and things change fast, but let's make a paper version because I don't know, that's more official, and maybe it'll be used in schools, things like that. And so that's largely how we came to the, slowly morph to that paperback version.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great story. Did you want to add anything to that, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, really echoing a lot of stuff Dave said, but yeah, just talking to so many customers and them all being confused about the same few points was like, man, something needs to exist here that's an authority that's, guiding them in just a positive direction. And so, there's a ton of content out there. So yeah, to back to your point, like how do you make something stick out these days? Does a Twitter thread stick out? Does a tweet stick out? Does a blog stick out? And we had written largely a first version of this book as basically a series of blogs that we then put online, posted on Hacker News, allowed people to kind of download the full thing, like if they wanted to get all of them versus looking at one by one. And we got thousands of downloads. So to us, it was like, there's really an appetite for getting the whole thing, and not just sort of like, here's a piece here, piece there. People want to go front to back, and we got a lot of feedback on it. So yeah, it's part of why we pulled the trigger to kind of go full book with it, which was a journey, but we got there.
It's also a big effort to make a paperback version, right? Because you're going to ship this, and you can't just kind of piecemeal it. You have to really say, what's the whole collective story? And while we were making the book, I intentionally really tried to test a lot of things on a lot of customers, and the framework that we have of the stages of sophistication kind of came together over both writing the book and these blog posts, and then also talking with so many customers and noticing, there's really kind of these stages, and like there's thresholds that people get to and limits, and when you have to go to the next stage of sophistication, and that's what the book's about, those 4 stages that we've really seen. And there are very clear points, I think, in what we noticed of like where it's good to be at this stage for a little while, at the lake stage where your data's at least together but still messy, and that's good for a while. But then you need to go to the next stage we call the data warehousing stage, where your data's kind of cleaned up.
Yeah.
And then
we're gonna get to that. That's what I want to ask you about, the way the book is divided up, which is basically the modern data stack. But right before that, I want to get to something that I found super interesting just in the intro, which was you both explained very clearly who this book is for and who it's not. So because is this for massive companies in between? Everybody has data now. What do I do with it? And you say very clearly, if you're a small company that uses QuickBooks and Excel, you don't need the data stack, and you can probably be doing really sophisticated work for your purposes with what you have, right? We all know now Excel has been undervalued, and you can do amazing things just in Excel. But also what I thought was super interesting was that this is not a book for big data companies, but reminding people that a lot of what we think of as companies that are working with big data aren't actually big data. And I think you cite like the New York Times and some other big names. So tell me that what defines big data, and how actually limited is that in terms of the corporate space out there?
Yeah, really big data, frankly. The New York Times was a big customer of Chartio, and they had a ton of data, and it worked well. Discord, a lot of companies. But I guess some of that came out of the frustration of sometimes when you talk about what to do in data and what things to use, there's a really big, and I love there's a whole bunch of companies that are really pushing the forefront of scale, and they can just really chime in and say, no, this is how you should architect things, because it's like, okay, you're talking about like 100 petabytes, and everyone really kind of attracts to those, like, oh yeah, we need the really most powerful thing, and we need the like, and that the noise from that group, and we wanted to really kind of say like, okay, that's great. We're not really talking to you. There's probably unique ways to do things when you have a 200-person data team, and you're working at petabyte scale and stuff like that. I get it. That's different. And that's where a lot of data people kind of live, actually, and the opinionated experts also kind of live in that space. So you hear their voice a lot. And we wanted to kind of make a book that was for the 99% of companies out there.
Right. A lot of the hype is around that, but that's not the reality of where most people, even in quite big organizations, are working. So you lay out what the modern data stack is, again, in the echo chamber that a lot of us live in as practitioners and experts. We know what that means, but tell me how you explain it. You kind of started that already, that you break the book into 4 parts. So start with the first part. I think it's data sources, right?
Yeah, so the way the book lays it out is how kind of a company evolves into the modern data stack. So at the beginning stages of how companies deal with data, it's very much in isolated forms. So you deal with dashboards in the tool that you're using. So if you're using Salesforce, you're dealing with your Salesforce data inside of Salesforce. Maybe the only SQL you're writing is on your production replica, so that you kind of are seeing what's going on inside your app, and so your experience is kind of disconnected. And then
The stage is also named after kind of the data architecture you have at that stage. That's called the source stage. So all you're dealing directly with sources of data.
exactly, and where it starts becoming more of like modern data stack ish is the next stage, which is Lake, where you're using a tool like Fivetran to pull data from these various sources into a singular place. So that's like the first trappings of the modern data stack is basically spinning up Fivetran. There's more competitors nowadays, and then from there, going from that, you got all your data in one place to
So
it being
the lake, the data lake is where all the data is stored, basically.
correct.
Okay.
You use something like Snowflake, Redshift, BigQuery, and you're gonna use Fivetran to pull from all your various sources and kind of dump it all inside of one of these modern data warehouse engines.
And the benefits there, all your data is together, and you can query it however you want. And you also get a BI tool at that stage where you're not just using the in product things like the Salesforce. You're really using it all together. The data is still messy at this point, but you can really slice and dice it and see what you have and what you want to see.
There was a great article this week by Jeremy, I want to say Stakely. I'll check the name after the show. I forgot to double check beforehand, but who suggested a change in nomenclature that I liked, which was that the data warehouse, we should perhaps call it the data factory, right? Just in terms of how we all think, right? It's where you have the data, it's all been brought there. It's messy, but that's where you then reorganize it and maybe build it into the things that you're going to use later on. What do you think of that new term?
We really went back and forth a lot on the names of the stages, and we kind of like, it's really tempting in data to just create new terms, and we really wanted to not create new terms. And to be honest, like the source and the lake and the warehouse and the marts are all kind of old terms that kind of mix multiple different metaphors, but they for some reason become really standard. And we thought of a different ways of like, can we stick with one metaphor and go all the way through? That would be better. And and we just kind of said, like, let's just go with what people are using. They kind of work as a metaphor. The main thing is that it follows is kind of like oil refining, like how you go through that oil refining process in those stages. First, you you put it into a pool, a lake, and then you refine it and put it into warehouses, then out to the different gas stations or marts, and that's kind of where the metaphor kind of works. But
that totally works. I can see why you didn't use it though, right? Because none of us want to be sounding like proponents of the oil industry, but that one totally works in my mind too. So the typical company you'd be speaking to, as you in this book try to make them a more informed company, they start with the sources, put into a lake, and then most of the discussion is really around what becomes the central hub of what to do next, right? Which is the data warehouse. So what was sort of the core, the most interesting thing about writing or explaining the data warehouse to you guys?
Well, so kind of as you say, like most companies that we dealt with were basically stuck at the lake stage. So they got everything there and then didn't know what to do with it. At this time when we were writing the book, DBT was just starting to kind of gain some traction. We started using it internally. Similar mission and kind of making it easier for people to work with data. You can do all your transformations with SQL versus complex Airflow jobs. So we took that and kind of tried to articulate just sort of a design thinking, common sense way of how to make this data more usable. So, a lot of content out there is like, you need to conform the way you model your data to this. And our approach was kind of saying, well, ultimately, these tables need to be easy for people to query and visualize with a BI tool. Like that's the goal. So how do we get closer to that goal? And it turns out that you really get about 80% of the way there just doing kind of the basics in terms of cleaning up the data, making it understandable, removing like arcane labels, and just doing that gets you so far. And so that really resonated with a lot of our customers at Chartio, and that's what that section of the book really talks through.
We saw such a barrier in doing that data modeling, and again, people learn that from the Kimball Toolbook, which is a 20-year-old book. It's very hard to understand a comic. I've read it 3 times now, and still parts of it are like, oh, what do they really mean by that, and how does that actually work in practice? I've tried these things, so it's complicated, and that's why you hire very expensive data modelers, and we were trying to really lower the barrier on that, especially with modern tooling. A lot of the reasons that you used to go to the old Kimball style star schemas, which was the type of modeling that is the most prevalent, a lot of those reasons are now non-existent. It used to be because of performance, it used to be because of cost. Those things are now like, we now have data warehouses are now columnar stores, so the performance benefits are already made for you. You used to have to manually go store things columnarly, and now that's just automatic. And so the cost is also kind of like not, it's way more expensive to hire data modelers than it is to store another terabyte of data. Like it's not an expense thing anymore. And then the user friendliness of it, even that's kind of the one that's still maybe debatable. But no, we really think actually the way we propose to just still keep that structured schema, not in a star way, but in very similar to how they're in the database, but denormalize where you can and should, and clean up names, and also clean up those queries so there's not junk data in there, of course. And that's really what we recommend to do for modeling. And the barrier to go from that stage 2 to stage 3, where you have clean data, and oh my God, things just like open up for you once you have clean data. It just so opens up for you. We want to lower that barrier, and that's what we try to do with this book.
So you've brought everything into the data warehouse, cleaned it up, done the transformations you need, done basic modeling that can be done in a very efficient way now, as you said, thanks to the technologies. And then what's next? The final part of the book is the Data Mart, which again is one of many terms you could have used. But what's when you wrote the Data Mart section, what did that mean to you? What were you describing?
Yeah, so as a business grows and gets more complex, and as more parts of your organization are using data, they tend to need specific versions of the data in order to do certain types of analysis easier. They're not required, right? But for instance, going back to the NPS score, it's kind of an awkward metric to aggregate if it's not transformed in a specific way so you can do averaging really easily. So while that wouldn't have been recommended at the warehouse stage, at the Mart stage for, let's say, the marketing team, that's an easy thing you can add in there to make the data just that much more usable for their use case. So it's about just trying to make it even easier for these different parts of the org to use data.
It's also about slicing it up into smaller chunks, where your warehouse is your source of truth of the whole company. It's got how every part of the company and all the different data sources are working together. And if you hand that, sometimes there's 500,000-800,000 tables in there, and you hand that to a marketing team, they're going to be, most of it they don't need. So you say, here's the 10, 20 tables, 30 tables that you need. Here's 20 for the sales team. Here's product team. You guys need 400. That's, but like other groups, like you slice that up to give them the data they want. And sometimes you do transform the data a little bit to be a little more unique for how that team would especially want it.
Amazing. We've only got like 5 minutes left, and we could say a lot more about, excuse me, the modern data stack. But it's okay we didn't get to all of it because people can just pick up your book. That's all right. But I do want to finish on the question for both of you, that what's the and it's okay if you're influenced by where you currently work in your answer to this. That's all right. What's the most exciting next step or current step happening in the modern data stack? And you don't have to say Hightouch for sure, because we're not here to sell our product.
No, I mean, I think, so you had, again, kind of Fivetran increase the amount of data in the warehouse, then by increasing the number of sources. Then you had DBT, which kind of made it easier to turn all that data into something much more usable. And so now we are just seeing that being used in a lot more ways, such as Hightouch, such as, again, like these data science, machine learning use cases. I mean, I think that the Hightouch census, reverse ETL, taking action with data, operational analytics, all the buzzwords, all those have tremendous potential, right? So to take this data and now put it back into a user experience to power different parts of the org to make their actions be powered by data, I think is a profound change in the stack. And I think that's part of the reason why I went to go work for Dataful is because I saw this happening, and it just increases the stakes on if this data is good or not. And so there's a whole bunch of companies that do some similar stuff to what Dataful does, largely observability type stuff. But I think this whole category got created largely because of y'all's category. So it's like we're getting more leverage. So now all of a sudden we need more quality again too. So I think those two pieces are brand new, and I'm excited about both of them.
Right. Everything that's on the side of the warehouse, that's the things coming out. And obviously Hightouch, the other data activation tools are a big part of that. But that's, like you said, created this amazing space for then how do we make sure, what is it, the garbage in, garbage out, make sure that
it's highlighted that problem even more.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, no, it's an exciting space to be working in and writing about and all that. Absolutely. And what's your take on that, Dave?
I think the most interesting part, our book's been out a few months, and as much as I think we've solved the problem, I think it's just getting started on. I think we have now with DBT and Dataful and a bunch of Hightouch, like these are all we're having the tools, like the tools are out there, but the education on like how to use them and good practice on using them, I think they're still very much being misused. And like if you do your DBT modeling, you can actually make things worse. You can make it and create more work for yourself where you didn't do it in like a uniform structured way. And so like those good practices, I'd love to see more talking about, more chatter about. Instead, we really get caught up in like the buzzy news, I think, and new products and what they can do. And that's really exciting, but also just like, how should you structure and clean your data? And that's, I think, such a big question that everyone's having. And everyone's, when you do it right, it has such a huge benefit that makes everything else just lock in, and then you can really start leveraging those tools in a big way. But unless when you don't have that, you're still building on a house of sand. You know what I mean? So that's just really, this continues to be a big problem, continues to be, a passion of mine to educate people about that.
I love that. Yeah, and we spent a full hour talking mostly about the tools and technology, and yet to power those, you have to have the humans behind them, whether it's the data practitioners, the business stakeholders, and bridging that gap between them. That's a whole other conversation. But we'll just, even if you don't write a book on that, we'll get you on to talk about it in another show. So that sounds awesome. And just to finish, I can't remember if I told you guys this before we went on air, but for each episode, we give a donation to a Data for Good organization, the Scholarship Fund at Women in Data, to promote education, to get women into this career. So we will be doing that after the show in your name. So just to show our appreciation for your time, and also as a reminder that as part of the data and tech world, we want to be doing the right thing, and putting our name out there as having the right values. So thank you both for your time. Everybody go buy the book on Amazon or wherever, and we will talk soon. All right. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Cheers.